So on the eve of UFC 120, we check in with Kevin Iole, who is going to be covering the fight card along with myself and the rest of the Yahoo crew. Kevin, how you doing?
I am good, Steve. How are you?
I'm good. Good fight card to cover. Main event I find intriguing. It is worth noting, though, that they are in London, and the three main fights do feature a British fighter. Do you think in some ways any of the three Brits, whether it's Hardy, Bisping, or Hathaway, is being pushed maybe a little too hard, is in a spot they shouldn't be in, maybe a little overrated?
I guess we're going to say overrated. The one I know most people are going to say is Michael Bisping, but I'm going to say Dan Hardy. I just think Dan Hardy all of a sudden got this reputation as a monster, and I'm not so sure, it was deserved. I think Dan Hardy's a good fighter, and I think Dan Hardy can do some good things, but I just think the reputation that he has, far exceeds what he's accomplished in the cage.
Well, let's start with the Hardy fight then. He's a pretty healthy favorite. He's 165, 175. Against Carlos Condit. So what do you think? Condit's a pretty accomplished fighter to be catching that kind of number.
I think he is. I think it's a tough fight for Carlos because I think Hardy does some things better than he does. And Carlos has never been the toughest guy when the chips are down. Now, his last time out against Rory McDonald, I think, maybe he started to disprove that. And he came back, he was kind of getting dominated and on his way to an unceremonious loss, and he came back and pulled out the fight. And, maybe that's going to be one that'll push him to a different level. I just think, in this case, I think Hardy's a harder hitter, and I think Hardy will find a way to win the fight. I like Hardy in the fight. I don't discount Condit because I think Carlos probably has overall more skills in different areas of the game, but I think the punching power in this one will be a big difference, and I think that will lead to Dan Hardy winning the fight.
I suspect there'll be like 14 to 17,000 fans at O2, all fired up, mostly rooting for Michael Bisping. Wrote the other day, I think the rest of the world, 95% of the viewers are going to be rooting for Akiyama. It's just something with Bisping. He rubs people the wrong way. I like him. He's one of the guys who gets it. He promotes the fights, and too bad if you don't like me. Where do you think he is right now in his career and his skill set? And can Akiyama's actually a pretty, with all he's done internationally, and he was a big signing, he's actually a pretty healthy dog.
Steve, I think, first of all, I don't get the dislike for Bisping. I don't see him as being as cocky as a lot of these people think. I mean, whenever I hear him talk, he's respectful. Has he been involved in trash talk? Yeah. But, I just don't get the idea that, that he's this cocky, crazy guy that, that some people want to think he is. And I've dealt with Michael for, 5 years now, and he's always been an accessible guy. He's always been an entertaining fighter. And, I think a couple things. Number one, he's really being penalized for the Matt Hamill fight. Not his fault. He fought the fight, and the scoring was what the scoring was, and I think a lot of people were upset about that. So, that to me is one thing. But when you look at his career, I mean, this is a guy that came very close to beating Rashad in New Jersey. Fought at the Prudential Center. It was a really tough fight, very close fight, split decision, lost to Rashad Evans. Later, Michael dropped down to 185. I think, Bisping, other than Dan Henderson, has been competitive with everybody he's fought. It's been right there. The Vanderlei Silva fight, I was there in Australia. I had Vanderlei winning the fight, but I certainly could have made an argument for Bisping. I think Bisping is a pretty solid fighter. I'm not sure he's ready to beat or ever will be ready to beat an Anderson Silva, but I think he's a decent fighter who's a fun guy to watch. He comes to fight. He has an entertaining style, and I don't quite get the hate that this guy gets.
You like Bisping in the fight?
I do. I think he's a big 185. I think Akiyama is a small 185. I think there's a gap between them there. I think if Akiyama really wanted to, maybe I'm wrong on this, Steve, you might have different thoughts, but I think Akiyama could probably make 170. I don't know. I mean, I think he's not that big of a guy. And I just think, Bisping overall, is a more complete fighter, and I think fighting at home will be an advantage for him. And so I expect Bisping to win the fight.
All right, the other fight, and there's several Brits beyond this, but in the main three fights, the other Brit who's involved is John Hathaway. He's come on quickly. He's, 22, 23 years old. He looks big for 170. How much do we discount the victory over Diego Sanchez because he's too small to fight at 170? Maybe he wasn't motivated. Maybe he overlooked John Hathaway. And how does that play into this fight against Mike Pyle, who, he's a good submission fighter. You just don't know what you're going to get from fight to fight with Pyle.
Right. Pyle is a guy that, if he ever put it all together, he could be really dangerous because, you see him in the gym and he's tremendous. And he's got a lot of, individual parts that are good. Maybe the whole isn't as good as the individual parts with Mike Pyle. I think Hathaway has a chance to be one of the elite welterweights. I really do. I picked him before the fight with Sanchez. I picked him to win. I was not surprised at all. I was there in Germany and also in Ireland for his UFC debut. In Ireland, he fought a nobody, Tommy Egan, and so you had to discount that, although he totally dominated him. But he fought Rick Story over in Germany, and believe me, Rick Story's a tough guy. And I think John Hathaway looked really good against Rick Story. Rick Story's going to win his share of fights, and John Hathaway, handled him. No, I like what I see out of John Hathaway. I think he's going to be a star. I'm going to pick John Hathaway to win this fight. I don't think he's going to submit Pyle. I think Pyle's got good submission defense, obviously, but I do think Hathaway figures out a way to pull out a decision victory.
Okay, let's mention one last fight because it's actually an interesting fight card, and I hope we get to see a lot of the fights on Spike. You always root as a fan for good fights, but also sometimes quick fights, so you see more fights. One that I think we're guaranteed to see is Cheick Kongo against Travis Browne. You saw Browne in person. I got to see the fight on TV for that one. He looks intriguing. I mean, big dude, 6'6", 250. And with Cheick Kongo, we're kind of in this weird mode right now, weird position, because he came up as an elite striker, but then it seems like when he goes against other good strikers, big guys, he turns to his wrestling. So what are we going to get from Kongo, and how do you view this fight? Is Browne a prospect, or is this an easy win for Kongo?
I'm not that high on Kongo. I just don't see, he's a guy that I don't see what the fuss is about. For some reason, there was a lot of hype that Cheick Kongo was this. And the fact that he got so thoroughly outboxed by Frank Mir, forget the knock, it wasn't a knockout, but the knockdown that really decided the fight, because it essentially put him out where Mir could put the choke on him. But, Mir was outboxing him in the first minute of the fight before he landed the big hook. And that's not to disparage Frank's stand-up, but certainly if Kongo is this feared striker who's one of the, who's tried to be portrayed as one of the elite strikers in the world, you shouldn't be getting schooled by Frank Mir on the stand-up. He did. And I look at Kongo's, fights. He dropped Cain Velasquez a couple of times. He couldn't put him away. Cain just, picked him up and slammed him and beat the heck out of him. I'm not a big Cheick Kongo fan. I think that the jury's still out on Travis Browne. A big dude, seemed like pretty athletic to me. But, remember who he fought. He fought James McSweeney. Let's not get carried away. He didn't beat Brock Lesnar. He didn't beat Shane Carwin. He beat James McSweeney. So I think, we have to, kind of keep it in perspective. But, I'm going to go with Browne in this fight. Just, I think that... he's going to find a way. I'm not a big fan of Cheick Kongo's game. Nothing personally against Cheick, but I just don't like his game, and so I think Travis Browne wins the fight.
All right. Well, check for all the coverage up on Yahoo, CageWriter.com, and also Kevin will have some stories from UFC 120, and we'll be back next week because we have a lot of angles, a lot of discussion to get through on the Brock Lesnar card against Cain Velasquez, the man that you said would be the champion a couple of years ago, so we'll see if it turns out to be true.
I picked him, so I'm stick with him.
All right, that's a tease for next week, right?
Thank you, sir.